On that terrible night in AD 64, Rome was burning in flames. On Palatine Hill, one of the city's hills, there was a figure watching this horror from the balcony of the marble palace. A lyre in his hand, a cold smile on his lips. This man was the most controversial, most frightening, and perhaps most misunderstood ruler of the Roman Empire. Nero, Claudius, Caesar, Augustus Germanicus. But the real story is much more complex than what you know. Today I will tell you the true story of Emperor Nero, whose name in history is associated with evil, but who in reality was a much more complex personality. Because sometimes history is written by the winners, and the truth is distorted for centuries. Dear history enthusiasts, before we begin today's epic journey, if you love this kind of in-depth historical analysis and want to discover the dark secrets of the Roman Empire, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Because in the coming weeks we will cover the unknown stories of all Roman emperors, from Augustus to Caligula, from Hadrian to Marcus Aurelius. And now let me ask you the question you're wondering about in the comments. Did Nero really burn Rome? Or is this a great historical misunderstanding? Share your thoughts in the comments, because at the end of the video, you will learn the surprising answer to this question. When the child born as Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus was born in AD 37, no one could have guessed that his fate would change the Roman Empire forever. His mother, Agrippina the Younger, was the sister of Emperor Caligula and granddaughter of Augustus. His father, Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus, was a member of one of Rome's most powerful families. However, this noble birth did not make the child's life easier. On the contrary, it placed him right at the center of Rome's most dangerous games. When little Lucius was only 3 years old, his father died. His mother, Agrippina, was an ambitious and ruthless woman. She was a typical example of a mother who dreamed of bringing her son to the throne, who did not hesitate to spin all kinds of intrigues for this. Power struggle in the Roman palace was a never-ending war, and Agrippina could maneuver skillfully in this war. In AD 49, Agrippina's grand plan came true. She married Emperor Claudius, and thus her son Lucius became the emperor's stepson. This marriage was not just a love story, but a calculated political move. Agrippina was doing everything necessary for her son to become Rome's future emperor. Claudius had a biological son, Britannicus, but Agrippina saw him as an obstacle. Young Lucius's education was given to Seneca, Rome's most distinguished philosopher. Ironically, Seneca, considered one of the greatest moral philosophers in history, was raising his student, who would be referred to as the most controversial emperor in the future. Seneca tried to teach him Stoic philosophy, virtue, and self-control. However, the corrupting effect of palace life and Agrippina's constant power-focused indoctrinations limited the effect of this noble education. In AD 54, Emperor Claudius died mysteriously. According to the official story, he died of natural causes, but everyone in the palace believed Agrippina had poisoned him. According to Tacitus's records, Agrippina had help from the famous poisoning expert Locusta. With Claudius's death, Lucius, who was only 17 years old, became the new master of the Roman Empire, taking the name Nero. The first years of the empire went down in history as Quinquennium Neronis, or Nero's 5 years. This period was a golden age for Rome. The young emperor was displaying excellent governance under the guidance of Seneca and Burrus, commander of the Praetorian Guard. Taxes were reduced, people's welfare increased, arts and culture developed. Roman citizens were satisfied with their young emperor. Nero was not only a ruler, but also a passionate artist. His interest in music, poetry, and theater was real and deepened. For Roman aristocracy, these hobby-level interests were acceptable, but Nero wanted to go on stage and perform before the public. This was a scandalous situation according to Roman tradition, because it was thought that emperors engaging in performing arts lowered them to the level of plebeians. But real problems began with the turmoil in Nero's personal life. His mother Agrippina constantly made efforts to control her son and influence his decisions. Nero's unhappy marriage with his first wife Octavia was negatively affecting the young emperor's psychology. Moreover, Nero had fallen in love with a beautiful and manipulative woman named Poppaea Sabina. In AD 59, one of the darkest events in Roman history occurred. Nero had his mother Agrippina killed. Complex reasons lay behind this murder. There was a great power struggle between them because Agrippina continued to use her son's power for her own interests. Agrippina constantly interfered with Nero's decisions, even threatening to remove him from the throne and replace him with Britannicus. The planning of the assassination showed Nero's creative intelligence. First, he invited Agrippina to his villa in Baiae. He had the ship his mother used while coming sabotaged, but Agrippina miraculously survived the accident. Thereupon, Nero sent his centurions to kill his mother in her villa. According to Tacitus, Agrippina challenged her son with her last breath, saying, "Strike the womb that bore me." This murder completely changed Nero's psychology. After killing his mother, it was as if all restrictions within him had been lifted. The influence of Seneca and Burrus began to decrease. Nero now saw every way as permissible to fulfill his own wishes. Roman aristocracy was anxiously observing their young emperor's changing character. In AD 62, Burrus died and Seneca withdrew from politics. Now there was no one left to control Nero. The new commander of the Praetorian Guard, Tigellinus, was a person who supported, even provoked, every desire of the emperor. For Nero, this meant complete freedom. The same year, Nero divorced his wife Octavia and married Poppaea Sabina. This marriage created a great scandal in Roman society because Octavia was Emperor Claudius's daughter and was loved by the people. Moreover, Nero sent Octavia into exile, accusing her of adultery, and finally had her killed. This murder seriously shook Nero's image in the eyes of the people. In July of AD 64, the greatest fire in Rome's history broke out. The fire started near Circus Maximus and lasted 6 days and 6 nights. 9 of the city's 14 districts burned completely, 3 partially. Thousands of people became homeless. Historical structures turned to ash. Where was Nero during this disaster, and what was he doing? According to legend, as Rome burned, Nero was watching the city from his palace balcony and playing the lyre. According to some rumors, he was even singing songs about the fall of Troy. This image was shown as proof that he was a cruel and indifferent tyrant to his people. However, historians say this story is largely false. The truth is that when the fire broke out, Nero was at his villa in Antium, present-day Anzio. As soon as he heard the news, he returned to Rome and personally directed rescue efforts. He opened his palace to refugees, established emergency shelters, and distributed aid from his own pocket. He made great efforts to meet the basic needs of the people. So then why was the legend Nero burned Rome born? There are several reasons for this. First, after the fire, Nero started a great reconstruction project, and at its center built a huge palace complex for himself, Domus Aurea, or Golden House. This palace was so large it covered a third of Rome. Inside were artificial lakes, parks, gold-plated halls. The people began to believe their emperor had burned the city for this magnificent palace. The second reason was Nero's savage persecution of Christians. Nero, seeking the culprit of the fire, pointed to followers of this new religion and applied terrible tortures to them. He crucified some Christians, threw some before lions in the arena, and used some by covering them with tar and burning them to illuminate his gardens. This savagery was never forgotten by Christian writers in the following centuries, and stained Nero's image forever. The third reason was political. Nero's enemies, especially the Senate aristocracy, were propagandizing against him and spreading rumors about the fire. Because Nero's populist policies and pro-people practices were disturbing traditional Roman elites. When construction of Domus Aurea was completed, Nero said with pride and joy, "Finally, I can start living like a human being." This palace was extraordinary in terms of its architecture and artistic value. With walls covered with frescoes, movable ceilings, dining halls where flower petals rained down, this palace was the pinnacle of Roman architecture. However, for the people, this was proof that their emperor was extravagant and self-admiring. In AD 65, the Piso conspiracy was revealed. Senators and aristocrats were planning to kill Nero and replace him with Gaius Calpurnius Piso. However, the conspiracy was exposed, and Nero started a ruthless purge. 43 people were executed. 30 were sent into exile. The most tragic victim in this purge was Nero's former teacher, Seneca. Seneca, although he did not participate in the conspiracy, was forced by Nero to commit suicide. The great philosopher ended his life with his last words recorded by Tacitus as, "I remained loyal to the emperor, but I will remain more loyal to virtues." This event showed exactly what point Nero had reached. The death of Poppaea Sabina was another tragic event showing Nero's tendency toward violence. In AD 65, during an argument with his pregnant wife, Nero kicked her so hard that Poppaea had a miscarriage and died. After this murder, Nero experienced deep regret. He declared Poppaea a goddess and organized a magnificent funeral for her. He even had her mummy filled with balm, because contrary to the burning tradition, he wanted her beauty preserved. During this period, Nero's passion for art increased even more. In AD 66, he went to Greece and participated in various music and poetry competitions. He competed in the Olympic Games and was declared first in the chariot race, even though he fell from his chariot. He won a total of 1,808 awards. Of course, all of these were due to political courtesy, but Nero saw them as real achievements. When he returned to Rome, there was now a completely changed emperor. Nero was now openly going on stage, singing and acting before the public. This was completely contrary to Roman traditions. An emperor engaging in performing arts was an unacceptable situation for the aristocracy. In the year 68 AD, a great rebellion broke out. Gallia governor Gaius Julius Vindex rebelled against Nero. Initially, this rebellion was suppressed, but then Spain governor Galba also opposed Nero. In Rome, the Senate declared Nero an enemy of the people, and even the Praetorian Guard withdrew its support from him. Nero, left alone in the palace, panicked. He tried to escape, but there were enemies everywhere. He took refuge in his freedman Phaon's villa. Here, when he heard horse sounds, he heard from around the approaching end, he decided to commit suicide. However, he could not find the courage to kill himself. Qualis artifex perio. What a great artist dies thus, he said in his last words. This expression summarized Nero's personality perfectly. Until the end, he saw himself as a great artist. With the help of his freedman Epaphroditus, he stabbed himself with a sword and died on June 9th, AD 68. With Nero's death, the Julio-Claudian dynasty ended. However, his legacy affected Rome for a long time. His Domus Aurea was demolished. The Colosseum was built in its place. For Christians, he became forever the symbol of the Antichrist. However, part of the Roman people missed him because he was an emperor who truly cared about their welfare. So was Nero really history's worst emperor? The answer to this question is much more complex than you think. Yes, he was a murderer and was responsible for the death of many innocent people. However, he was also a ruler who supported the arts, cared about the welfare of the people, and beautified Rome. Nero's tragedy was that he had unlimited power, and this power corrupted him. As Lord Acton said, power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Nero was a living example of this. A young man who was initially well-intentioned and artistic-spirited, over time turned into a ruthless tyrant. We must not forget that history is always written by the victors. Nero's enemies, especially Christian writers and Roman senators, may have exaggerated and distorted stories about him. Perhaps the real Nero was neither completely good nor completely bad, just a complex personality with human weaknesses. Even today, Nero's story teaches us important lessons. How can power and authority change a person? How can art and politics come together? How does a leader's personal life affect their governance? These questions are as valid today as they were in the time Nero lived. In conclusion, Emperor Nero will continue to be one of the most controversial figures in Roman history. He was the paradox of an artistic, spirited despot, an intelligent but ruthlessly unbalanced leader, an emperor who loved his people but killed his elites. Perhaps his greatest tragedy was wanting to be a great artist, but being born as an emperor. However, history remembers Nero. His story shows the complexity of human nature and the dangers of absolute power. And perhaps most importantly, it shows us that history is never black and white. There are always shades of gray, and the truth mostly lies in this gray area. So what do you think? Is Nero history's greatest evil or a misunderstood artist? Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you like this kind of in-depth historical analysis, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button, because in upcoming videos we will also cover the stories of Rome's other controversial emperors. See you in the next video.